All right. Hello, welcome, Deborah. I'm going to go ahead and kick things off with a little bit of recap, and then maybe we'll get a few more before we jump into new topics this week. So, just kind of a recap from last week, right? We kind of wrapped up the marketing conversation a little bit. We covered the 4 Ps, right? Product, place, promotion, and pricing. And we talked a little bit, it might have been the previous week actually, a little bit more about identifying your ideal customer, right? And finding those customers in that space. Additionally, last week we kind of went through the IMC tool to help you kind of focus on where you might kind of spend some of your time and energy working on finding those ideal customers to bring into your business. And remember, these practices and this approach works for you in a variety of different places within your business too, not just your customer base, right? Some of you probably are doing something that may be very specialized, and there's already an existing demand for your service, but there's other aspects of your work that or your business that need support, right? Maybe you're looking for investors, maybe you're looking for partners, maybe you're looking for board members, those kinds of things. And these practices tend to work in all of those different areas, right? We're talking simply about human behavior and how we can kind of capture and draw people to us that are part of the mix. So if there's any questions, feel free to type them in the chat about the topics we covered next week. And again, hopefully all of you have access to the drive and you can see the materials that we've been going over and the recordings as well. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about any of the topics that we've covered so far. And of course, any topics we covered today, please, ask questions in the chat. I'm happy to tailor the content a little bit more specifically to your needs. We have a nice size group here, so it's easy for us to kind of really hone in on what you're specifically working on and how we can help there. So that, Meredith, welcome. And this week, we're going to talk about customer engagement, right? So this is one of my all-time favorite topics because it's, in my opinion, the most critical aspect of it. You may remember last week and probably the week before, I consistently mentioned the cost of acquiring a new customer, right? So we went through the process of identifying who our ideal customer is so that we can be more effective with our cost to acquire that customer. And we know, statistically speaking, that keeping existing customers is much, much cheaper than acquiring new customers. So when you have a nice, healthy customer base, we want to do our job to keep those customers engaged and happy with the business products and the services that we provide. I may have mentioned last week as well that every industry has what I call a magic number. And just to recap, on this is something I discovered a long time ago when I was in the banking industry, and back in the day when it was really the cool trend to open a big box bank on every corner of every possible parking space and parking lot outside of your local anchored tenor grocery store strip mall. And customers would bounce back and forth between the banks because when a new bank would open, they'd hang a banner outside and they'd say, "Come open a free checking account, we'll give you $50. And I thought there must be a way to kind of prevent that because $50 does, in the grand scheme of things, isn't a lot of money. And so doing some research and digging into the customers that left the bank and those that didn't leave the bank, what I discovered is that when the customers have 6 or more products with my banking institution, they're likely not going to leave me in their lifetime. Right. And these products include like your checking account, your savings account, they have direct deposit, they have an ATM card, they might have an IRA account with me, et cetera. And that $50 was not enticing enough to them to make them leave the bank, go across the street to another bank and have to set up all those accounts all over again. So I started doing some digging and realized that every industry has this kind of magic number, or what we call the customer penetration ratio, right? And it varies between each industry. So that, because there's 6 in the banking doesn't mean that that 6 is the right number for every industry. But for most of you, you're offering services where we want our customers to be engaging with more than one product or service that we're offering, because many of you likely are providing a holistic approach to providing service to your clientele, right? We're trying to help them get better in some capacity, and that's, as most of you know, that doesn't happen in just one therapy session or just one time out on the ranch with the horse. It doesn't happen in one occurrence, right? And so, and it doesn't typically happen in one methodology, right? It's not just simply that one-on-one therapy session that solves the problems long term. There's typically behaviors that we need the client to do when they go home. There's typically other potentially supplemental products that we want them to be using or applying to their practice at home as well, whether that be nutrition supplements or just daily routines and habits, those kinds of things. Those would be that kind of customer penetration ratio that I'm talking about here. And so for each of you, it's going to be a little bit different, but the concept is really the same on that approach, right? And I used to say this all the time when I was in higher education. Before I was a chief academic officer for a university for a long time. And I used to coach deans who in turn coached professors how to engage students better in the classroom. And my comment to them was, to the professors was, if you can get your students to actually talk about your subject matter content when they're not in your presence and they're not in your classroom, you're winning, right? That's the whole goal of an educator, is to really make sure that the student or the participant in the program is talking about what you're teaching them long after they've left your class, right? And so how do you keep them engaged and keep those students coming back? I'm going to give you some of those examples here in just a few minutes. And again, I want you to be thinking about it long term. And the nice thing about the customer engagement piece is that it doesn't typically cost us more money, right? So oftentimes you think about things like, well, if I'm going to apply these methods, or if I'm going to offer additional products or additional services, it costs me more money to do that. If you remember from week 2, we talked about cost of goods sold and how you approach that and what that cost is in, say, a therapy practice where you're primarily providing services and not physical products. But in most cases, it doesn't actually cost you more money to increase the services or the products that your customers are getting from you. In fact, it's usually a way for you to increase your profit margins. So if you remember from the Sean Anker video last week about the secret of happiness, he kind of jokingly said in his presentation, as the therapist, right, our job is to make you, when you come into our office knowing that you have one problem, we want you to leave knowing you have 6, right? And he was kind of joking about it a little bit, but in reality, from a business perspective, we do want our customers really taking advantage of every aspect that we have to provide for them. And it's not just typically that one service. So there's a variety of different ways you can do that. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples here. Let me share my screen. These are going to be 3 pretty short videos, so try not to blink. The first one especially is only like 15 seconds long. So let's see here. Okay. All right. Make sure the volume is up. Get this to happen. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. So feel free to type some comments in the chat. Let me know what you thought of that video. What's really interesting about that video, so that technology is something called augmented reality. If you're not familiar with it, it's the concept of overlaying digital content on top of the real world, right? So I'm a firm believer in augmented reality. I used to speak at conferences around the world to educators on why augmented reality is so much better than virtual reality in the classroom. And I have lots and lots of content on why that's the case. But here's what I like to tell people about this technology is it's free. So there's a ton of different apps and different things that you can do to engage your audience, and it's relatively easy to set up, and in most cases it's free, and it's easy for you to teach your clients how to do that. Now, many of you might be saying, well, gee, how can I, my customers don't use, my clientele is not tech savvy. I'm not tech savvy. I'm gonna walk you through it because it's pretty great. Yes, it personalizes the product, Consuelo. Thank you very much for that. So augmented reality is nice because it does create a personalized approach. In the video that we watched, what we saw is somebody using their cell phone, pointing their cell phone down at their feet in their favorite pair of jeans or whatever they're wearing, and trying on shoes virtually, right? What was even more cool about that technology is that not only did they get to try them on to see how the shoes would look with their favorite pair of pants, they got to share it out on social media and get buy-in from their friends and their family members to say, hey, those look great, you should get them. And they were able to make a purchase right from the app. And that whole thing took less than a minute to do that. And again, that technology is just simply overlaying on top of the real world environment. Now, and to Consuelo's point, it creates a personalized experience, right? I don't have to go to the store, be a number in a retail shop. I get to create the shopping experience the way that I want. And I get to boost my consumer confidence because, again, I'm getting immediate feedback from my friends in the process. So I saw this video. It's been a long time ago now since I first saw and learned of this technology, but this is a true story. So I'm going to tell you how I use this technology to increase my student enrollment at a local college here when I moved to Denver by 700% in 1 year. And it didn't cost me a single dime. So there's an app that you can use. It's called Arrangema, and I'll put all this stuff in your shared folder today. That company has since been bought out by HP, but I think it's now called HP Reveal. Again, totally free to create. And I thought, how can I use this technology to really engage students or get more students to come to the classroom? And why I started thinking about creative ways to get students to the school was because the college that I was running was focused on trades education, so welding, auto mechanics, cosmetology, different programs like that. And I would talk to, most of the students would come as a referral source from a high school counselor. And the school had not done a very, very good job of keeping those relationships strong with the high school counselors, but more importantly, they didn't build a good reputation for themselves with those high school counselors. And I literally had a high school counselor one day tell me, if I send a student to that school, it means I've given up on the student. And I was appalled. So, I just had finished building a 50,000 square foot campus with the state of the art technology in all of these different fields. And it was literally like an adult playground for excellent space for students to come and learn. And so what would happen is I would try to get these high school counselors to bring tours of students to the campus so that we could walk them around and show them the campus and really convince them that this was a good place for them to pursue their education. And so I'll just tell everybody in case you're familiar with the school, but the college is called Emily Griffith Technical College. So it's the original trades education college in the country. So it started now about 110, 112 years ago. by Emily Griffith herself, who was a third grade teacher back in the early 1900s. And back then, even primary education was considered a privilege, not a right. And she thought, you know what, there's a ton of people that really want access to education, and this isn't right that they can't come here. So she created her own school, and it's gone on to do that. So in the process of touring kids through this school, we would have these, huge life-size posters of Emily Griffith herself and students from the 40s working in a particular program, and all these cool old black and white photos around the campus. And we'd stop during the tour and I'd tell the story and I'd bring the students up to speed. And let's be honest, they're high school students. They weren't super engaged with listening to me talk, and or my instructors talk necessarily. And so I thought, how can I need to get these high school counselors and these students more in tune with what we're doing here. I came across this technology, this augmented reality technology, and I thought, well, how can I use that to really get kids hooked? And so, if you're familiar with the Denver area and you're familiar with the Emily Griffith story, you may know that there's a woman who actually dresses up like Emily Griffith herself and does tours of the Brown Palace in downtown. And I approached this woman and I said, "Hey, would you mind if I filmed you dressed up as Emily Griffith? I have an idea. I want to do something." And she's like, "Yep, totally down for doing it." And she recorded about a minute and a half long video for me, pretending to be Emily Griffith and pretending to tell the story of why she created the school and what the students should expect when they come there. So the next time I had a tour of 50 kids come through the campus, I had an iPad and I pointed it at this life-size poster of Emily Griffith in black and white, and Emily Griffith came off of the wall in 3D and told the story in person. I no longer told the story myself. I no longer tried to persuade the students in my own language. I let Emily do it herself. The students' jaws hit the floor. They were just totally baffled, A, at the technology and more in tune with the story. And then we proceeded to do that with other images in there as well, including students who were pictured from the 40s. We recreated some of those with the students that were in the current classrooms, and they would come off and say, "Hey, this is why I chose this career path, and this school gave me the opportunity to do this, this, and this, and now I have this great job doing X, Y, and Z." The students were just instantaneously hooked. So 50 students would come through in one single tour. 40 of them would try to sign up to register for the next semester there. So, all right, we have win number one. Well, then I still feel like I just didn't have the high school counselors really in tune with what I was trying to do. And I'd host them in my building for their annual meeting for all the high schools across the whole region. I'd buy them lunch and I'd just listen to the pain points that they were experiencing. And I asked, how do I get you to put my flyer, my piece of collateral on the top of your stack when a student is in your office asking you where they should go to college? And they're like, we have so many colleges. It just really depends on the student, whatever. And I thought, okay, I'm not done with this technology here. I'm gonna, because all the what called one pager, right, for every program, had this, just a picture and a brief description of what the program is, what all the courses would be in that particular program. And I thought, okay, I'm going to swap out all these pictures and I'm going to make them be people. More importantly, I'm going to make them be my instructor, because nobody's more persuasive than the instructor at selling their own program and why their program is the best. And so I filmed all the instructors in action, welding, working on a car, doing hair, whatever it was that they were doing. I filmed them doing that, and I made their picture come off the page on that physical printed out 8.5 by 11 one pager. And I showed the counselors how to do that. Again, totally free. All they had to do was have an app on their phone. They didn't even have to create an account. I said, here's the flyer. When the student's in your office, you just take your cell phone, you hold it over the top of the page, you let the page do the rest. Instantaneously, the high school counselors took to it. They gave it to the student. They showed it to the student, and the student was blown away in the office. They took the flyer, they ran out into the high school quad and shared it with all their friends. Okay. Those two things alone increased my enrollment 700% in 1 year. I'm 100% convinced those are the reasons why that happened. Then on top of that, I thought, well, okay, I still think there's more with this technology, right? What else can I do with it? Where are my instructors having pain points? What are we doing to try to help engage the students with, again, the content and keep them really in tune with what's going on? So in the welding program, as an example, they have to set up equipment, before they start a welding process. And some of the equipment's relatively complicated. There's a lot of steps involved. And as the enrollment grew, and there were now, we went from 6 students in one program to 110 students in that same program, the instructors were starting to feel a little overwhelmed because they're like, I'm explaining how to set up this machine to a group of 25 students at a time, and not all of them are listening, not all of them are paying attention. And I have to keep going back and telling them over again because they weren't listening the first time. I said, okay, cool. Let's use the technology to make it so you don't have to explain it again ever. So then, again, you're talking about a young population. A lot of instructors are like, put the cell phones away. We don't want the cell phones in the classroom. And I said, no, let's do the opposite. Let's encourage them to bring the cell phones to the classroom. In fact, let's make it a requirement and we'll put it on the syllabus. They are required to bring their cell phone to class. It doesn't cost them anything. They simply point their phone at this physical 3-dimensional object. It doesn't always have to be these, a 2-dimensional photograph, as an example. They can point it at a 3-dimensional object, and the instructor would come from off the screen into the screen and explain to the student how to set up the machine. And they could literally see where the cables got plugged into a certain outlet, where to turn the dial, whatever it is that they needed to do. And it worked on every piece of equipment in the shop. And we did that for almost every program. And then the students were just hooked, right? They're like, this is so cool. I get to use my cell phone to do something really cool, and I'm learning at the same time. Well, then we stepped it up a notch on that because, again, remember my statement. If you can get your students, in this case, students, if you can get your students to engage with your content when they're not in your presence, you win. So how do we do that in the welding program? We created what we called the Fab Police on social media. So we used Instagram. We created an account called the Fab Police, and it stood for Fabrication Police, right? And so we would get the students, right? You teach them about a certain technique in weld. You teach them about how strong the bead should look, whatever the case is. And then we would say, you know what, this weekend, I want you to go out and find me 10 bad welds, handrails, chairs, tables, wherever you're at, everything is welded, right? So go out and find it. And I want you to post it on the Fab Police social media. Hundreds of students took to it and just couldn't stop talking about welding. And, oh, look how crappy this handrail looks. I can't believe somebody posted it that way, right? So yeah, there was a lot of negative tones to it. But the students were looking for that thing, and they're looking for the quality associated with that piece. So I would just encourage all of you to be thinking about how you can use techniques that you normally wouldn't think of, and how can you use it with your audience, right? So I used augmented reality as an example with finance classes that I would teach in MBA programs, and I would send students out onto the street in downtown Chicago with this technology, and I'd say, keep your phone on, walk the city. There's 3 buildings in this 1 mile radius. There's 3 buildings that house financial institutions that you wouldn't know because you can't see them from the street. There's 3 buildings in there that house these financial institutions. I want you to find those buildings using augmented reality and report back to me on their financial statements, because that's how I had it linked. So again, 3-dimensional object, they can point their phone at it. They found the building, the financial statements would come up on the screen. They took the notes that they were instructed to take, and they came back and they reported it back to me, right? So they're out in the real world and they're doing these kinds of things. So be thinking about how you could potentially use this type of technology, or any other technology really, to keep your audience engaged, right? And again, your participants don't have to be tech savvy. You don't have to be that tech savvy. Everything that I just told you that I did at the college, I created on a single cell phone, 100% free. I didn't spend a single dime on anything, and I increased my enrollment 700%. So, that's a great way to not, increase your clientele base, right? It's a great way to engage your clientele so that they're always, working on the things you want them to do. As you know, most of you, when you work with your clients, they don't just leave your office, they're not cured, right? And or there's stuff that they need to do on their own in order to improve themselves in that process. And you can use some of these creative ways to do that. Okay, I'm not going to cover a presentation that I normally cover for this class. I'm not going to cover it today, but I will give you the PowerPoint presentation in your drive that you can look at. But I talk a little bit more extensively about some of these techniques and how they apply it to a variety of different industries, right? So retail and some other space as well. So you can kind of look at some of the information that's in there. So just to think about it from a fun perspective, right? And if you want people as an example, sometimes just having them do a simple process to stop, pause, and reflect in the moment, right? Or appreciate the beauty that's around them. If you're dealing with somebody that can only kind of see the negative or the dark side to a lot of things, and we want them to pause and take a moment, you can use some of these techniques to help them do that and help them be reminded. Many of you, if you may use these already, or you're familiar with techniques like journaling, and or branded products or copyrighted materials where therapists and professionals have developed these tools to help patients and clients just stay on top of their schedule every day, to reduce the anxiety and the stress associated with time management, as an example, right? Those are things that work to help engage the participant when they're not directly in your presence, and therefore reinforcing the tools that you're trying to give them in order to be successful in the first place. And more importantly, they're going to get the reward from doing it, and become more loyal to you as their trusted advisor, right? As their care practitioner, whatever they like to refer to you as. And therefore they're likely going to refer more clients to you, right? Which is great, because we didn't have to pay money to acquire those customers through word of mouth. Okay. All right. I'm going to show you another one. Okay. This is another engagement technique here. Again, this video is pretty short.
Already the most popular snack on the planet. So to increase sales for 2010, we decided to make it something more than just a snack. We looked at how teenagers were spending their money and realized that for the price of a 99-cent bag of Doritos, they could just as easily buy an iTunes download or an Xbox upgrade. To compete for their dollar, we turned our late-night flavored chips into an entertainment experience that iTunes and Xbox could never offer, featuring one of the world's biggest pop icons, Rihanna. With a bag of the chips, users can direct their own version of a world premiere video for Rihanna's new track, Who's That Chick? An IR marker on the back of each bag gives users control over the video, letting them switch between Rihanna's day side and her night side as often as they like, creating their own custom version of the video. Inspired by the potential of this project, Doritos decided to expand it into a global music experience. 5 bands from 5 different continents performed, again, controlled by you, the user. 360-degree camera technology lets you guide your own way through all 5 videos using simple click and drag controls. The media strategy was simple. Just leak the story and let it spread itself. MTV, Access Hollywood, and top music outlets around the web continue to break updates on the project. But none of them can show you the Rihanna video, because the only way to see it is with a bag of Doritos late-night flavored chips. To date, the average visit tops out at nearly 5 minutes. Unique visits are approaching 500,000, and Rihanna's Facebook posts and tweets have mentioned Doritos over 30 times. And we still have not spent a single dollar on media. Doritos turned an ordinary bag of snack chips into a global music venue. Not bad for 99 cents.
All right. What do we think of that one? I know most of you are probably huge Rihanna fans, but Anyway, I thought the technology is super cool. An IR code is the same thing as a QR code if you're not familiar with it. Totally free to create. You can apply it on any surface, your business card, a billboard, a bus wrap, anything that you want. But a QR code, most of you probably have seen them. They're like that square. It looks like it's a bunch of pixelated dots. You can point your cell phone at it. You used to need an app. Now you don't even need the app. You can just point your cell phone at it with your camera on, and it'll take you to the website where the menu lives at the restaurant that you're visiting, or any content that you want. And that's what they did here. So a couple of things that I really like to point out from that video is, again, we're still talking about engagement, and you can see certainly from the video how consumers were engaged. So this is really important to understand, because when you think about who your competition is, right, from a business perspective and who's in your space, it's not always just a direct competitor that you're looking at, right? In essence, really what you're doing is you're competing for the consumer's dollar. And they talk about that in this video. For $1, they can buy a bag of chips, or they can go buy a music download, right? And so that's, music and snacking are not necessarily considered direct competitors in that way, but we're still competing for that consumer dollar. And so they combined two different fields in order to kind of create something new and very exciting. The other thing that they talked about, so Consuelo had mentioned before, personalization, right? So with the IR code, they gave the consumer the ability to control which video they wanted to watch, right? The day side, the dark side, whatever they wanted. And then they, so they give them that customization to do that. And they said in the video that the average visit to the website was 5 minutes. So in the digital marketing space, if you can get a consumer to stick on your page, whatever page it is, your website, ad, wherever you're directing them with the visual digital content that you provided them, if you can get them to stick for 10 seconds, literally 10 seconds, that's a win. And now they have people on their site for 5 minutes. Okay. Talk about building brand loyalty around that and sharing it through social media. The other thing is, they said they didn't spend a single dollar on media, right? They just leaked it out there into the universe and let the consumers feed off of it and share it with each other, and it grew and expanded into what you saw there. Now, of course, they probably spent millions of dollars producing the video, but they didn't have to spend millions of dollars to advertise it and push it out into the world. So these are things that, again, you can use as a tool or a technique. As an example, let's say if you're working with a population that's maybe older, and maybe they're struggling with dementia or memory loss problems, things of that nature, and they're not taking notes in your session, and or they can't remember where they provided the handout that you provided them when they left your office. You can work with them and their family members to use technology like QR codes to say, well, it's always here. Everything that we talk about is always here. Just point your phone at this, right? It's a great way to stay engaged with the family members that are typically providing care for your patient when they're not in your office, right? And how do you keep them in tune and up to date with what really happened in the office? Because they can't always be there, right? Or maybe they dropped mom or dad off, and then they had to run a quick errand while they were in your session, and they came back to pick them up. And instead of you trying to regurgitate the notes, there's a way for you to keep them engaged in that process. And then the daughter who did the dropping off is going to go back and refer to that when they have time to actually sit down and focus on it, right? Not while they're trying to grab it and read it while they're running back to the car to take mom home so they can get back to work. And they're likely going to share it then with their siblings, right? To keep everybody up to date with what's going on there. Again, loyalty to your brand and your service, from a customer standpoint, and they're going to be engaged with the content that you're providing and the care that you're trying to put forward with your patient. Okay. So I use this technology, right? So now I grew this enrollment 700% at this college and I didn't have the bandwidth to do tours anymore. Right? I just simply couldn't do it. I had classrooms that were literally bursting at the seams, and I could not take tours of 25 to 55 kids through the campus on any given basis. So I found the technology online that was free. I could build it myself. I took the students from the school because we had a video production program. And I said, hey, I need you guys to come over to the campus for 8 hours for 3 straight days. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to film the tour through the campus, and we're going to interview all the instructors. You're going to film everything, and you're going to do it in these segments. And I had it all mapped out how I was going to do the segments. And then you're going to give me all these videos separately, and I'm going to piece them together in what they called it was called something tree. I'm drawing a blank on the name. Anyway, it was all built into the technology. It didn't cost me anything to create it. And I dropped all these videos into like this choose your own ending type approach. And what happened then, it was like a point of view. So the camera always filmed as if they were filming through the eyes of a potential student touring through the campus. And they would come in through the front door, they would see me, I would greet them, tell them, welcome to the campus, here's how it works, you choose where you want to go. Then a menu would come up over the top of the screen that would identify the programs that we offered within that building. And the students picked which ones they wanted to see. If they don't want to go to the accounting class, they don't need to go to the accounting class, right? They just pick the one that they wanted to go to. I want to go to auto body repair. They click on that. The camera then walks through the campus, again, from the student's point of view, walks through the entire campus, goes into the classroom. So they're seeing the campus, they're seeing other students cruising through the hallway and what the lifestyle would be like in a day in the life of a student on that campus. They open the door, they go into the workshop where auto body repair is happening, and the instructor comes over to the camera and they greets them. How you doing? I'm Emily, I'm the instructor. Let me tell you a little bit about the program. They do about a 20 to 30-second spiel on what the program is. They're seeing students actually working on real cars in the background and sparks flying because they're, shaving metal and different things like this. And then a series of questions would come up over the top of the screen that the instructor would ask, that the instructor would answer. So the student could say, because we always kind of knew what the common questions were that students would ask, right? How much does a program cost? What's the typical schedule like? Can I, do I have to have my own tools? And so we would provide those questions and the instructor would respond to those questions. That's a great question. Let me tell you the answer. And so the student could do that as many times as they wanted, back and forth and back and forth. It took me 3 days to set it up. I got the students had the opportunity, real students from the school had the opportunity to work on a real project, so that's a resume builder for them when they go out to get a job interview. And this thing lives on in perpetuity, and I never had to personally tour students through the campus ever again. And my enrollment never dipped as a result of that. So in fact, it continued to increase because there was yet another cool tool that the students were engaged with because it was different than how anybody else was using it, right? So that's kind of how we used those technologies in those settings. But again, a younger population, you might say, well, sure, they're always into technology and that kind of stuff. But I'm telling you, almost every single person on the planet is using technology, whether they accept it, know it, or acknowledge it, right? So just be thinking about it in that way. Okay. Are there any questions so far? I'm going to show you one more video on the same topic, and then we're going to kind of move ahead. Right. This one's a couple minutes long. So.
Promote the True Blood Season 2 DVD and Blu-ray launch. We wanted to connect with True Blood's thirsty fan base. But with digital downloads, video on demand, and multiple airings on HBO, selling DVDs is more of a challenge than ever. So we set out to build a brand experience that leverages the DVD's potential for marathon viewing and how Too Much True Blood alters its fans. But we didn't just say it with compelling TV. We showed it by allowing fans to participate through interactive web banners, Facebook tabs, even new social media built into the Blu-ray experience itself. We made the fans' passion for the show the driving force behind the campaign. Here's how. Transformation is the predominant theme of season 2. The good go bad, the bad get worse, and supernatural changes abound. With over 12 hours of season 2 episodes and extras, the season 2 box set allows for marathon viewing that can put True Blood fans through some serious changes of their own. The campaign began with a TV spot where a couple confesses to God knows what after watching a little too much True Blood at home. We will end today's service with a silent confession. After 12 back-to-back episodes of True Blood, what will it make you do? I want to do bad things with you. Season 2, now available on DVD. Next, it was the fans' turn to confess. With a series of interactive, rich media banners, fans by the thousands posted anonymous confessions about how watching too much Season 2 changes them. From the dirty to the bizarre, the fan confessions automatically became the headlines in future banners. And they all streamed to our own Facebook Confessions tab, where fangbangers continued to read and respond for weeks. Once the box set launched, the brand experience continued with a breakthrough piece of media built right into the Blu-ray features, True Blood Live Feed. With it, users would transform as they watched by linking directly to their Facebook and Twitter accounts. As fans watched the Blu-ray, their profile pics would transform, along with automatic updates to their walls and news feeds. True Blood Live Feed would also detect users' viewing habits as they watched and rewatched their favorite scenes, unlocking over 100 unique updates, gifs, and postings to chronicle their transformations. And every time they watched, a link to buy the box set and join the experience was right there next to their changing picture. The True Blood Season 2 box set campaign became a brand experience spanning across all media, even creating new media, to leverage the devotion of True Blood's millions of rabid fans.
Okay. What do we think?
Tackling was an easy choice for us because they had a great quality, strong box. They had complete design.
You don't want that. Okay. All right. Maria, I'm glad to see that you get inspired. Good. Any other comments, questions? I've never personally seen that show, but I just was really impressed with the way that they, and clearly this is a little bit outdated because I don't know that many people that have DVD players anymore. But the concept is really interesting, right? So they use basically all of the technologies that we talked about so far into one kind of comprehensive viewpoint there. And the things that were really impressive is actually changing the look and the feel of your own profile picture on a social media page, and how they really leveraged that opportunity to get users to be motivated to engage their friends in the process, right? Man, if you're not watching this show, you got to watch this show. Look at how cool this thing is that they did. And it's amazing, right? And now you have people that are binge watching stuff so they could catch up and get to season 6 or whatever it was, so they can get that box set and participate in that as well. So just be thinking about that. And when you see things that are, seem like, oh, maybe I could use that, how could I go about it? I would strongly encourage you to start digging, and you'd be surprised at how much stuff you can find that's free, right? Obviously, for the last example that I gave there, that HBO series probably had big budget. They created all of that stuff from scratch, but again, the technology that was used lives out there somewhere, and you can do a lot of stuff on it for pretty free, right? The augmented reality piece, there's tons and tons of apps out there that you can use just as a consumer. And or you can create your own content using them on the back end, right? There's a really cool app that I used to like to use prior to COVID because I got to travel all the time. But it was called Layer, Layar. And it's just an app you put on your phone. You go to some new city that you haven't been to before, you open the app, you hold your cell phone up and you point it down the street, and it'll tell you where all the restaurants are and give you their Yelp reviews that are part of that. So I could decide, oh, which restaurant do I want to go to? I don't even have to walk down the street. I just hold it up and point down the street. If there's a bus stop on that thing, it would tell me when the next bus is coming for that particular route. And it just works, right? Kind of magically. So, and that technology is only going to continue to get better. But again, it doesn't always have to be technology in ways that you engage your customers, right? Could be things like follow-up emails, follow-up phone calls, things that you can do. Most of the time, you want to try to find things that can be automated from your perspective, right? It's always nice to have that personal touch, especially with the work that most of you are doing, because there's a lot of personal care involved there. But if you can automate processes that still provide that personalized experience and free up your time to continue to take in new clients or more revenue generating ideas, I'm a huge fan of that. So just be thinking about different ways that you can apply some of these concepts. And again, it doesn't always have to be technology based, but technology does make a lot of things pretty easy. I'm not a tech person, right? I mean, I like having new gadgets, but I'm not the person that know. I have one of these smartphones, and I probably use less than 10% of what the phone is actually capable of doing. So if I can teach myself how to build an entire augmented reality experience for my students and my faculty, I think all of you could do it too. So just be thinking about fun ways to do that, and keep people engaged in the process. So I'm going to pause for a minute and see if anybody has any questions, and then otherwise we're going to move forward. You can raise a hand if you want to get unmuted. You can type in the chat or the Q&A section. Okay. Well, I will move ahead a little bit, and then keep the questions coming. If you have them, feel free to type them in there. So, okay, so we've kind of done everything at this stage, from kind of soup to nuts, if you will, from the beginning of, how do we create the business? What's the proper structure? What, are some of the important finance things that we need to be paying attention to? How do we get customers? Who's our ideal customer? How do we keep those customers engaged? How do we budget, to keep moving our practice forward, and those kinds of things. Now it's time to tie it all together. And normally what we would do in this stage of the experience is you would start to craft what we would call your pitch, right? Or your pitch deck. We're going to approach this a little bit differently for this group. So if you want to do it as a pitch, I'm all for it. If you want to do it as simply a storytelling piece to talk about why it's important, what you're doing, why your practice is important, because you're trying to convince customers to come through the door. You're trying to get investors for your business. You're trying to form partnerships, maybe with other healthcare providers that are doing something complementary to the work that you do. We always have to be telling a story, right? So some people always say, "Oh, I'm not a good salesperson." You might feel that way, but the reality of it is we all have to be salespeople all the time, right? In your personal relationships, in your relationships with your family members, with a spouse, a partner, a boss that you might have at work, a colleague that you have in the office, an employee that works for you. You're always telling the story, and you always have to be kind of convincing in that space, right? And some people feel more comfortable doing it. Some people are nervous about thinking about it. Like I could never get on stage and do a pitch in front of a large audience. Well, we don't all have to do that, but we all certainly have to tell a story. And when we're telling the story, the pieces that are really important are for you to figure out how you engage the audience so that they are fully bought into what it is that you're doing. And so, what you might be asking from the audience is just simply, to be a fan of what you've created. They don't even have to be a customer. They don't, and maybe they're not going to be a customer, but go tell 10 of your friends who might become customers, right? Or go tell 10 of your friends who might want to invest in my business, whatever the case is that you're trying to do. Go talk to, somebody that that works at a local hospital system that you want to partner with because you're offering some kind of complimentary service. You want to work with, each other, say in this group, because maybe you want to form some kind of group practice that is offering a variety of different services, but that all support the client in unique ways, right? And so I'm going to share with you a video that's a little bit longer. And I've been doing this kind of stuff for a long time. This video sums it up pretty clearly.
Thank you.
So I really liked the presentation. Obviously, Nancy's done her homework and done the research around the field, and really brought our true nerds in speaking out of us for this presentation. So I love that aspect of it. I love the flow, and I love the painting the status quo and this huge gap of what could be, right? So Marie, thank you. Yeah. So that part's really important, and in my role, I work with a ton of entrepreneurs, and I help them through pitch events to raise millions and millions of dollars. I've coached entrepreneurs that you've seen on Shark Tank and done those kinds of things, and they follow along with this format here. Oh, I'm still sharing. Okay, and so I just I like the format. It's really clear, it's easy to understand, and it doesn't matter if you're pitching because you're trying to sell, trying to get investor dollars, or if you're trying to, again, sell those partnerships or whatever. I also like in the video where she talks about making the audience the hero, right? And that's something I think oftentimes we forget to do as part of the process in making them the hero, right? And I also like the examples that she gave and how she really took the time to analyze it, right? She quantified the Steve Jobs speech from the perspective of monitoring when people were clapping, when they were physically involved in the presentation as an audience member. I think that part's really important. And I'm sure many of you have been in a situation where you're involved in a conversation, or you're working directly with a client, or maybe you're giving a speech yourself and it feels like you're losing the audience, right? They're not paying attention, or they're easily distracted by other things. And so kind of keeping some of these principles in mind, I think, are important. So I'm gonna give you a real world example of how we can do what Nancy just explained to us in a real world pitch. So let me show you. Last video for the day, I promise.
Hi, my name is Debbie. I'm an engineer from Stanford, and I was always bothered by how few women there were in my program, so I've decided to do something about it. I'm starting a toy company called Goldie Blocks to get little girls to love engineering as much as I do. Goldie Blocks is a book and a construction toy combined. It stars Goldie, the girl inventor, and her motley crew of friends who go on adventures and solve problems by building simple machines. As girls read along, they get to build what Goldie builds using their toolkit. I grew up in a small town in Rhode Island. My parents' dream was for me to become an actress. They never bought me Legos, they didn't buy me Connects or Lincoln Logs. It didn't occur to them, or me either. These toys develop spatial skills and get kids interested in engineering and science. I didn't even know what engineering was until I was a senior in high school. So to me, Goldie Blocks really is the toy that I wish I'd had growing up. A lot of companies try to take their construction toys and make them pink to appeal to girls. And while, yeah, it's true, girls do like pink, I think there's a lot more to us than that. So I've spent the last year researching this. How do we get girls to like a construction toy? It all kind of came down to one simple thing. Boys like building and girls like reading. Since we met girl in Goldie Blocks, she likes to think outside the box. So I came up with a really simple idea. What if I put those two things together? Spatial plus verbal, book series plus building set. School's 11. Woo! I took the story and my prototype and I tested it with over 100 kids. We got it! Daddy, you have to watch this. And that's how Goldie Blocks was born. Can I do it? You want your little girl to play with Goldie Blocks? because as much as she likes dress up and princess stuff, and don't get me wrong, I like that stuff too, there's so much more to her than that. She can explore every opportunity to become anything she wants to be when she grows up. The thing is, 89% of engineers are male, so we literally live in a man's world, yet 50% of the population is female. So if we want to live in a better world, we need girls building these things too. We need girls solving these problems. This is Goldie Blocks. This is the one sample I have from the manufacturer. I have spent my entire life savings and I have pulled in every favor to make this happen. You buy this right now on Kickstarter, I will hit the green light and I will go into production. The thing is, the minimum order is 5,000. So help me buy these for your daughter, your niece, your friend's daughter. Any girl you know is so much more than just a princess.
That is how it works.
Help me build Goldie Blocks so that our girls can help build the future. Thanks for watching.
So that's a real world example of following Nancy's flow in 3 minutes. Okay, and that presentation that we just watched on Goldie Blocks there is a typical kind of format that you would expect to see in a fundraising pitch event. Typically, we allow entrepreneurs about 7 minutes to do their story. And there's some elements that they need to have in there. But the story, right, follows the flow. So if you think about Debbie here in Goldie Blocks, she started with the status quo. I'm a female engineer in an engineering program at Stanford. There's no other females here. That's the status quo. Wouldn't it be amazing if there were more females in this program and we had more female engineers, right? She's painting the great bliss, what it could be, right? Then she continues to weave through that pattern. Current status quo, toys exist on the market that, you know, are these spatial engineering toys, and all they do is paint them pink, right, to appeal to girls. Well, that doesn't work. Wouldn't it be great if girls were actually interested in playing with these types of toys and being more engaged in that process? So here's what I discovered, right, with what the problem is, and I created the solution. Now we've combined these two things and we've made it fantastic. And, you know, if you remember in Nancy Duarte's video where she talks about how Steve Jobs paints the new bliss at the end of his speech, she paints the new bliss, Debbie paints the new bliss in her presentation by showing you what the product would look like on the shelf with her little piece of paper there and kind of picturing it. So she's doing that. Do you think that she made the audience the hero in that presentation? Right? Did we engage the audience? And it was just a video that we watched, right? And so we're not in the room, so we can't see the physical reactions, those kinds of things. But from the storytelling piece, do we think that Debbie made us feel like heroes? We have the power to change this problem, right? Thank you, Deborah. We have the ability to help lots of little girls become engineers, right? And all we need to do is help support this project. So I think she did a really great job in that presentation. So here's some fun facts about that actual presentation. So I'll talk about this in a minute, but Debbie did this presentation on a platform called Kickstarter, which is the original kind of crowdfunding campaign platform. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But the goal on that platform is for Debbie to go out and raise some money from people so that she can put that product into production. You heard her say in the story, I've spent all my life savings getting the prototype ready. Now I have to hit the go button, but the minimum order is for me to get 5,000 units. So the platform allows her to basically collect money from the average person by pre-selling the item to them, right? So we prepay for it. And then we hope that you know, Debbie is successful at getting the production out, and then our product arrives in 6 weeks, 2 months, something like that. And so it's a good way for early stage entrepreneurs to get some money, but I'll talk again more about the platform in a minute. But so the way it works is that she sets a goal, and the goal on that particular campaign is what they call it, was $150,000. She told her story Within 3 days, she raised $185,000 and was successful at getting the product made, getting it into the hands of the consumer. The company, 2 years after this video was made, had a commercial on, a television commercial on during the Super Bowl. So if you're familiar with the cost of a 30-second television commercial during the Super Bowl costs $4.5 million. And that does not include the production of the video itself. She was on the Super Bowl. Pretty cool story. She later got sued for that television commercial because she used a Beastie Boys song in the background without their permission. They since forgave her and didn't follow through with the suit, but she learned a valuable lesson there. That company still exists to this day. It has a Saturday morning cartoon and a whole line of toy products out in the market, and has since been purchased by a private equity firm. So a really kind of cool, successful story all took place from a 3-minute video that followed that process and that flow and that format. So it's just a fun story to learn about. I personally love the product and the mission that she was behind there, with being an engineer and wanting to make more girls interested in the field of engineering. But that concept works across the whole gamut, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about funding, just because I think maybe some of you might be interested in that. If you have questions that are specific to your business, feel free to ask them in the chat, raise a hand, whatever you'd like, and then I'll try to get to them. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about funding, and then we'll talk a little bit about next week, okay? So when you're funding a new business, right, if many of you are starting out or first time, and again, it doesn't matter if it's a private therapy practice, if it's yoga, if it's some other type of health and wellness related business, the journey is typically the same for most entrepreneurs. Doesn't matter if you're doing the work that you're doing or you're creating the next great tech app, platform, or physical products like what I make. Typically, the way the process flows is you start out with your what they call the friends and family round, right? So you typically sink all of your own money into the project. You typically lean on friends and family to provide you any money that they're willing to kind of give you to help move the business forward. And usually during that friends and family round phase and your self-funding phase, you're out there kind of proving the concept, right? So what we call the proof of concept phase. And you're going out there to see if people will actually, be willing to pay for the product or the service that you're creating. And, if you're making a physical product, you're typically making prototypes, you're getting it in the hands of people. You heard in Debbie's video where she tested her product with 100 girls to get candid feedback, right? Because Debbie can design the product and think that it's cool, but if no little girls want to use it, then it's not effective. So she did the right thing there by getting people to test it. And normally in classes that I teach, especially for really early stage entrepreneurs, we typically say your homework this week is go talk to 100 people you don't know. And it's because I want you to go out and talk to people that aren't in your circle of influence. Your friends and family always think that it's cool, whatever it is that you're creating, because they want to be supportive of you. But 100 people you don't know are going to be really, really candid. And that candid feedback is the part that's important. I tested my product on 150 dogs in 7 different countries before I decided to put it into production and put it out in the market. Because I wanted to know that I wasn't the only person that thought that it worked. So that part is really important, but that's typically what happens during that friends and family around phase. Then typically what happens is companies will go out and they will, if you want to take on outside investment capital, right, get investors as an example for your business. Marie, yeah, if you have a brutally honest sister, that's good. You could test a lot of things out on her, I suppose. Thanks for sharing that. If you wanted to take on outside investors, you would then typically go into an angel or a seed round funding phase. And typically in that phase, you're typically looking to raise $1 million or less, right? It could be $10,000, it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it's typically less than $1 million in that round. And what you're doing as part of that process is you're giving away a portion of your company in the form of equity to those investors for, the stake of the hope that they're going to make a big return on it and that you're going to be able to grow and scale the business. Now, I would assume that most of you on this call likely will not pursue outside investment capital. But if you do, I'm happy to chat with you one-on-one, about your specific, growth pattern and what you're trying to do. And I'm happy to help make connections where I can for people that make it work. But the reason why I assume that most of you will not pursue that is because when you pursue outside investment capital, A, it's really expensive. And B, it's once you start, you can't ever really stop. And you're not spending as much time focused on the actual business itself because you become kind of a full-time fundraiser. The other reason why I think that is because most of you probably are not creating the types of businesses that what we would say scale, right? So when you're focused on scaling a business, and what I mean by that is that, if we're going to create a private practice as an example, right? Doesn't matter the specialization in, say, therapy that you're providing, but I want to create a private practice. Mostly what happens is you create a private practice, maybe you add, 3 to 5 new practitioners into your private practice over the course of the next, 1 to 5 years kind of thing. And you grow that practice, and that's great. That's not scaling. Scaling would be opening a private practice with a plan of opening 50 private practices under that brand or that name across the country in less than 2 years. So that's like a rapid scale model, right? And most of you probably, that's not a plan that you have. And if you do, that's fine. We can talk about that as well. But it's not as common in, the health and wellness type plans. There are some entities that do that, but it's not as common. If you don't have a business model that's rapidly scalable like that, it's more difficult to find outside investor capital, because outside investors want to get paid back, and they typically want to get paid back within 5 years, and they want to get paid 10 to 100x what they put into the pot. So when I say it's more expensive, typically speaking, if you were to try to put a number on it, this is just a high level gauge. There's no hard fact here to this, but if you were to look at it from an interest rate perspective, typically outside investor capital costs you close to 33% on, from an interest rate perspective on that payout. Because if your company grows up and it becomes very successful and very profitable, the investors get their portion of it based on the amount of equity that they have. And that tends to be about 33%. Whereas when you think about debt financing, say from a bank, you're probably somewhere in that like 6 to 9% range. So huge difference there. Most of you typically, if you do need outside capital, will seek it in the form of debt financing. So if you have good credit and you have a ton of assets and you don't mind putting those assets at risk via a personal guarantee, you can go to a bank and get debt financing through a bank, right? And typically you just start at the bank where you bank already for your business or your personal stuff, and you can get debt financing. Most banks will offer debt financing for relatively early stage businesses in the form of what they call SBA loans. So Small Business Association is a federal agency. And basically what the SBA does is it provides a guarantee to the bank that at least 50% of the principal that you borrow from them will be covered in the event of a loss. So if your business failed and you weren't able to pay the loan back, the bank would be at least guaranteed 50% of that principal balance based on the guarantee provided by the SBA. That makes them more eager and more likely to lend money to you because they're taking a bigger risk, but they're getting some insurance to it. But it also costs you a little bit more money because they have to pay, basically, think of it as like an insurance premium to help cover that. So you're probably going to be closer to the 9% range if you can get a bank loan, which is still pretty good. Other types of debt financing at that same phase are through what we call community development finance institutions, or CDFIs. These are typically nonprofit entities that are set up for the sole purpose of providing debt financing to businesses that typically aren't yet bankable, right? You haven't been in business a long time, or you haven't been in business at all, you're just starting up. They are more what we call character-based lenders. So they're more interested in you and your story, right? So your storytelling piece, and what the potential is for what you can do, and they're willing to take that risk on just that, right? They typically will ask you for a business plan or an executive summary, and ask you for some financial projections. If you don't know what they are or don't know how to create them, they actually have services that will help you create them so that you can apply for loans. Most CDFIs are pretty good for loans from, say, $50,000 or less. And for many of you, that might be certainly enough money to help you move the project forward. There are some CDFIs that say they'll do loans up to like $1 million. But more commonly, they're about $50,000 or less. I've seen a few do some that are like $250,000. But because they're character based and not risk based as much, like through your credit score and that kind of thing, they charge much higher interest rates. So you're probably closer to like 10 to 14% on that. Now we can argue that all day long, and again, I don't want to get too heavy into the finance piece of it. I would potentially make an argument to say the interest rate is somewhat irrelevant, because typically for $50,000 or less, it's a relatively small dollar amount, and you're typically going to have it paid off in less than 2 years. So yeah, you're going to pay it, a few hundred extra dollars in interest, but it's not like you're paying a 30-year mortgage on your house at 14% interest, right? That's a different kind of equation. So I wouldn't necessarily let that be a deterrent as far as seeking that type of financing option. Okay. So then kind of beyond that, what you would typically do from an investor side of things is, after the angel or the seed round, you go into what we call a Series A round. And an A round typically is probably somewhere between $1 and $10 million, but probably more commonly like $1 and $3 million. And that money typically pays off the previous amount of financing that came in the angel or the seed round, and gives you more operating capital to keep moving the business forward and expanding. Use that money typically for marketing expense, adding team members, product development, other things that you're doing at your businesses. As an example, maybe you're trying to purchase a building where you can operate your practice out of. Maybe you would seek some financing to do that. But again, with a physical asset like real estate, you're probably better off trying to get debt financing on the real estate itself. And then debt financing above kind of that initial round of what you'd get for debt financing from your bank. And a lot of banks will do loans up to, $100,000 fairly easily if you have decent credit, and, again, you have some collateral and that kind of stuff. And it's just simply like a revolving line of credit. When you go beyond that, and your business is really humming along, let's say some of you are operating a private practice and you have multiple revenue streams. So you have clients that come in and they're paying you in cash when they come for a visit, or they're billing through insurance, right? Let's call that one type of revenue stream. But also maybe you're seeing patients or clients through a referral source, like a workforce comp agency, right? Like, hey, we're a workforce consultant for these big companies, and they have, hundreds of employees that are constantly on workman's comp. But they have to go see a specialist in this area so we can kind of prove that they're actually, suffering from whatever it is that they're claiming they're suffering. And those tend to be fairly good for private practitioners, because they pay typically your full rate and they pay quickly. And they might, they might potentially be sending you hundreds of clients over the course of a quarter. And if that's the type of work you like to do and you're able to handle that bandwidth, it potentially can be very lucrative for your practice. Well, those accounts typically will create what they call accounts receivables, right? It's money that's owed to you, but it's not necessarily in your bank account yet. And banks will lend against that in what we call asset-based lending. Right. So you might say have $1 million outstanding in receivables, and the bank will say, hey, we'll give you a $300,000 line of credit so you can continue to pay payroll and just general operating expense until these accounts receivables come through and pay in. And that's typically how most businesses grow into that phase. That's typically good money for businesses, right? Because the interest rate's relatively cheap. They put what they call covenants on the loan. So they say, once every 90 days, the loan has to be paid down to zero, and then you can keep borrowing it back again. They just want to know that the business continues to be healthy. But it's relatively cheap money for you, and it provides a tax advantage when you are paying interest on it. And there's a lot of really good things associated with it. So when you see big companies like Apple, as an example, who literally has trillions of dollars, much of it in liquid form and investment accounts and things like that, you'll see on their financial statements that they have loans for like $500 million. And people would say, well, why would they do that? And the answer is because they're paying less interest on that $500 million of loans than they're making in interest in the investments of where they put their money in investment accounts. So there's good practices for having debt against the business, but you just have to be mindful of that piece of it. And then just for terminology standpoint, again, I won't dive too deep into it because I don't imagine most of you will go down this path, but from an outside investor phase, you have a Series A, typically then a Series B, and you can go all the way to Series Z if you want. But typically by the time a company gets to a Series D, they're getting what we say taken out, right? Or taken over by a private equity firm. So private equity typically is beyond that series. When we talk about Series A and through D as an example are typically provided through venture capital firms, or you hear the term VC. And then private equity is like big dollars, right? Typically, they don't even look at deals that are less than like $100 million. And they will buy out the firm, and they take care of all the former capital that went into the business. They pay off all the previous investors, and they typically take over the business as a whole. They bring in their own CEO, they bring in their own operating team, et cetera. And they're just blending it with other companies that they already have in their portfolio and capitalize on efficiencies and things like that. More commonly, that's something that you see in like high tech businesses, right? We just had a business in town yesterday that was announced, Ping Identity, grown here in Denver, was just reported that they're going to be bought out by a private equity firm for $1.69 billion. And the company will remain here and still operate under Ping and all that kind of stuff. And most consumers they don't notice the difference. But I'm just kind of educating all of you kind of the flow of the format of the cash. Yeah, and that's kind of typically how it works. Normally what I see with private practitioners is you're self-funding almost everything. You're maxing out credit cards, in the early days, that kind of thing, and or you're getting debt financing from the bank. It's typically better money as long as you're okay with taking on the risk and that kind of thing. But you're really at risk anytime you take in money from anywhere. But that's just the nature of the beast. You need to take in money for doing that. There's a ton of really creative kind of financial structures of things, right? So if you're working in a business, say as an example, and you make physical products, you might have businesses, there's a firm in Boulder called Kick Further. So the idea is like, I've done a Kickstarter campaign. Now I'm going to go on and I'm going to do, I'm making these physical products, but I still don't have enough money to go get a bank loan. Kick Further will fund your inventory. So you don't actually touch the money, but they pay to produce your inventory and move it forward. And then you pay them back as revenues come in for the sale of that inventory. And sometimes companies will do that for 1 to 3, 7 years before they kind of move out of that structure and get typical bank financing. So there's a lot of those types of creative things. For a lot of the work that most of you are doing, you likely would qualify for grants, some other types of fun free money, right? So there's a lot of programs out there right now to support early stage businesses with like what we would call seed capital, right? You can get a $10,000 grant simply because of the work that you're doing, right? So you're maybe that grant provider is really focused on a particular population, right? I would like to work with female founders. I like to work with founders of color, whatever the case is. And we're giving away grants to help you move it forward. And the fact that you're doing work that, provides a social good and supporting particular populations might be attractive to those grant providers. $10,000 is great. it doesn't go very far, but it's a good way to kind of get things moving and started forward. One thing to keep in mind when you get grants is that becomes a taxable event, right? So you're bringing basically revenue into the business. So you have to remember to set aside money to pay for taxes at the end of the year. If you get debt financing, the interest that you pay on the debt becomes a tax write-off. So it actually can benefit you in that way. So if you can find low interest debt financing, sometimes that's even better than what you think is free money through grants. So a lot of early stage businesses realized that as part of COVID, because during COVID, there was a lot of programs that came out that provided some funding to support the businesses, but the business owners forgot that they had to pay taxes on that. So it's not super detrimental, but it's just something to be aware of in that space. We talked a little bit about this for the businesses that are here and some of the practices. You may want to consider having two arms of your business, right? A for-profit arm and a nonprofit arm. And the primary reason for that is because it gives you the opportunity to seek funding from a variety of different places, right? The for-profit arm can generate revenue for services provided, and the nonprofit arm can raise money from grants and other forms of giving institutions, because those institutions only like to give to nonprofit entities. They don't like to give to for-profit entities because they're already rich and they're already looking for ways to reduce their own tax liability, and they can only do that through a nonprofit arm. But your nonprofit arm can then provide scholarships to the population that you want to work with who can't afford your services. So let's say you're working with a particular population of individuals that are low socioeconomic backgrounds, right? We know they need the services. That doesn't make them any less or more than the rest of everybody else that needs these types of services, but they can't afford it, or their insurance doesn't cover it, or whatever the case is. Through your nonprofit arm, you can provide a scholarship. So that client will come through your for-profit entity and seek out the services that you normally offer, and they can walk out the door without paying anything, or maybe paying on a sliding scale, right? So maybe you charge a couple $100 an hour for the work that you do, but you're seeing clients and maybe they can only afford $25 for the hour that they spend with you. That's okay, because your nonprofit arm raised money from a granting institution that said, hey, we will support mental health care for this particular population. We like it that you're doing that. Here's a bunch of money. And then your nonprofit arm can pay your for-profit arm to make up that difference for the patient who is in your office who can't afford to pay the full rate. And it's a great way to kind of create a win-win situation, because as practitioners and healthcare professionals, I think it's very important for you to get paid your full fee. And it's very difficult for a lot of you to do that, especially if you're doing insurance. So I would encourage you to kind of look at being creative with the models that you're creating and see if it makes sense for you to do that. Now, some people might say, gee, running one business is already hard enough. Why would I want to create a second business to do that? And I would just argue that it's not really that hard for you to do that. The nonprofit entity is fairly simple to keep track of. And unless you're doing a ton of volume through there, because you typically wouldn't be, right? Your nonprofit probably raises grant funding or donor money 3 to 5 times a year, maybe max. So, that's 5 transactions you have to log in an accounting system, and you have to file a single page document called a 990 at the end of the year to file your taxes for that nonprofit. Seems fairly simple. It doesn't typically have to require a bunch of employees and those kinds of things. So it just depends on how the intention of the nonprofit is used, right? Do you just add the nonprofit under the same name to your existing business, or is the nonprofit a separate business? You should typically create the nonprofit as a separate business. Now, you could call the nonprofit something similar to what you call your private business, right? Your for-profit business, but oftentimes it's different, right? Again, I mentioned this before, oftentimes with therapists that I work for, you see their name, right? John Smith, PhD, PC, right? So they're a clinical psychologist. They have their PhD, and the PC stands for professional corporation, right? And that's typically that's because they typically were advised by some accountant or somebody to create an S Corp or C Corp. The PC is somewhat irrelevant. You don't have to have that title at the end of the name, but some people like that to designate the fact that it's a business and not just the individual themselves. But then what you could do, so I use the example of John Smith, and he might have the Smith Foundation as his nonprofit to then support the for-profit entity, right? But the name is somewhat irrelevant, because unlike our for-profit business, where we're typically trying to build some following around a branding, right? We want if we're going to create a practice, as an example, we might want a really cool name that people can remember and recognize. We have a cool logo and branding and that kind of stuff. With the nonprofit entity, we don't need that level of branding structure behind it, because we're typically going direct to donors or applying direct to grant providers, and all they really care about is the programming and the services that you offer. So they're not as sold on that. So the name of your foundation or your nonprofit is not as critical, because we're not using it from a branding approach. So Katie, I hope that answers your question. But to create a nonprofit, it's the same process to create a for-profit business. It costs you $50 here in the state of Colorado and about 10 minutes online to create it. And then you go to the irs.gov website and you say, hey, I created a nonprofit. I'd like to, I'd like to get my 501c3 status. And they take, I think they're now doing it in probably less than a week, and they just send you an email that says, cool, you're approved. Here's your taxpayer ID number. And that's all you need to provide to potential donors or grant providers to do that. Okay, so Marie, so let's see. So what would be the reasonable amount percentage-wise to pay the for-profit because of the conflict of interest? So I'm assuming, Marie, what you're asking is if I was going to use money from the nonprofit to pay into the for-profit to offset the cost of that sliding scale patient, the answer would be pay yourself full fee, right? I think that's what you're asking me. So with the example I gave earlier, if you normally charge $200 an hour, and then you have a client who comes in who can only afford to pay $25 an hour, your nonprofit should pay into the for-profit business $175 to offset the cost of that, because we want to see full pay clients in the for-profit business. That part's really important. From a percentage standpoint, when you think of nonprofits, there's an agency out there called GuideStar, which is it's a membership thing, but you can, yeah, Marie, I'll unmute you here. Oh, here, allowed to talk. Okay, Marie, can you talk now? No. How about now?
I think you guys can hear me. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
I knew that question was a little hairy, so but I wasn't 100% sure how to put it to words. Okay. So I have a nonprofit entity that I started last year to help cover the cost of exactly what you're saying. Yep. And in my bylaws, because of the conflict of interest, right? Because like Colorado Equine Specialist can't be like the sole recipient of the grants and stuff, right? Because that's a conflict of interest, because I'm, the founder, executive director, and all that of the nonprofit, and also of the for-profit Colorado Equine Specialist. So I wrote in the bylaws, because I do partner with other therapists and other nonprofit organizations, that Colorado Equine Specialists cannot obtain, I can't remember exactly how I legally worded it, but the gist is, I think it was 35% of total gross revenue of the nonprofit, because I was concerned that there'd be something legally ramification of being the only person that receives funding from that nonprofit, because that's against the law, right?
It's not against the law. It just sounds like you're a darn good person. So you set that rule for yourself.
I did, because I
there's not a
wanted
rule that
to
says
get approved.
that you have to create a percentage or do that. You can pay 100% consulting fee to Colorado Equine Specialists from the nonprofit entity if you so choose to. Now, normally, and it doesn't, you're not doing anything illegal, right? Because you're going to pay taxes on that money that you took in from the nonprofit entity as revenue. And that's fine, right? So you're not doing anything illegal there. You're not being shady by any means. Where you're going to run into problems, and you really wouldn't run into problems as much in this example, but most people who donate money or provide funding to nonprofit entities have rules within them, within their own giving practices. They typically will say for every dollar they give you, no more than 10 cents of that dollar, so 10%, can go towards administrative expense, which makes it really hard for nonprofits that are pure nonprofits, because it's like, well, I have an executive director and I have to have 3 staff members and I have to pay to lease this building and keep the lights on. But donors want to know that 90 cents of every dollar that they give goes directly to programming. And that's just kind of the general rule. So when you apply for grants and you apply for funding from donors, that's the sales pitch you give them, right? Like, hey, I need $100,000 to provide these programming services to this population, and 90 cents of every dollar you give me will go to provide care for these individuals. That sells a donor all day long, right? Because they have the money, and it's not that to them, once the money goes into your nonprofit, there's no difference in their tax advantage or anything like that, but most of them want to know that their money is going to provide programming services, not to pay salaries. That's just the rule. And what I was about to say before we unmuted you, Marie, was there's an agency, it's called GuideStar. So it's a membership type of organization, but you don't have to be a member. You can still glean a lot of really good information out of it. But basically, their whole concept is around creating good practices and benchmarks for nonprofits, right? So that the 90-10 rule that I just talked about, you can find on GuideStar, how to structure your board, how to set bylaws, all these kinds of things are good practices to do that. And again, if you're creating this nonprofit arm to do like what we're talking about here, Marie, in your example, in most cases, I mean, you're not building a nonprofit that's, building towards millions of dollars in an annual budget, right? If you are, that's fine. It's just then if that's the direction you're going with that nonprofit, I would have you put a lot of structure to it. And the fact that you said you already have bylaws is, you're a step ahead.
Oh, I thought everything had to have, if you're going nonprofit,
No,
you have to have bylaws.
You don't have to have bylaws. You don't have to have a board. Those are good practices. And I would recommend people to do that, especially if it's going to be a main staple of what you're doing. But if you're like, hey, I created a nonprofit so I could get $100,000 through these 3 different grant providers to provide services, and it's never really going to get much bigger than that, you're probably fine to do that. But if every year it's like, let's keep adding, to that, to where we're building towards millions of dollars, then yeah, I would want you to have a board, and I would want you to have bylaws, and you could set the policies like what you're talking about with that 35%, especially if that nonprofit agency is providing funding to other service providers that are outside of Colorado Equine. That's a good practice to have, right? I don't know that I would limit your Colorado Equine to a percentage of the amount that's in the nonprofit. I would probably limit it to the dollar amount per service provided, right? Or the number of times you can tap into the to that nonprofit each year to balance out your funding, if that makes sense.
It does. And I just want to, one more, you probably already answered this, but I'm trying to wrap my head around it. So just to clarify, if Colorado Equine Specialist was the only grant recipient of the grants offered by, it's called Equine Therapy Alliance, the nonprofit. If I was the only grant recipient for all the funding that came into through ETA, there's no conflict of interest there?
But I mean, the conflict would not, the only conflict would be unethical business practices, right?
right.
So if it's like, well, I paid myself $100,000 from the nonprofit, but I only provided $50,000 worth of services, I mean, that's
Oh,
an
no.
ethical situation, right? The fact that you could tap into 100% of that if you're providing services for it, there's nothing, no conflict.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I set it up myself and I gave myself my own little nonprofit degree.
Yeah.
But I did a ton of research, but it sounded like you had to have some sort of clause and there was like a certain amount where you could only benefit from, but it wasn't really clear on what amount. Um, but it's just interesting because I'm going to spread the love anyway, but I just
Yeah,
thought I couldn't.
I think what you're thinking of is, if you had a foundation, say as an example, some nonprofit entity, and they were just simply writing checks to the for-profit arm, not specifically related to services provided, you would probably have some type of clause like that. But if you're providing services, there should be no limit to that.
Fascinating. Thank you for clarifying for that.
Sure.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah. So if there's other questions, please ask. I can ramble on for days and days. What I'd like to do, I know some of you are going to have to drop off here, but what I'd like to do is next week when we meet is I'd love to hear some stories. So whether you want to structure it in the form of like a pitch, and if you want to do that, feel free to reach out to me if you feel like you want some guidance around that and wasn't covered in this class, or you just simply want to tell us as the audience more about your practice, why you went into that field and why it's important in the work that you're doing. I would love to hear some practice around that. So we can have a type of dialogue here. I'll go through the process of making sure everybody can be unmuted and those kinds of things. And then any time that we have left next week, because next week is our last week together, I'd like to answer any questions that you have that feel like, were covered in this class, but still seem a little bit muddy and you want some clarification, or other questions that you have that weren't necessarily covered in this class, because I could talk about business for days and days and days. And we just simply didn't have enough time to get through all of it here. So I would love to answer any direct specific questions that you have about your business or where you want to take it to next. And I, of course, always encourage you all to reach out to me directly if there's something that I can help you with long after this class is completed, right? So I'm happy to be here and be a resource for you long afterwards. Can a board member be a sole donor for the nonprofit, or are there limitations to that? There's no limitations to that. It's not a healthy practice from a board member perspective, right? Because if something happens to that board member, then the nonprofit entity has become reliant on that, and then they have to kind of start over from scratch. So normally when you put together a board, so a couple of things to think about for a board for a nonprofit. Typically you do not pay board members to be on your nonprofit board. That's not how it works. And it's actually the opposite. So you create a policy that's called a give or get policy, very common. So if you want people to be on your board, they either have to give you or find donors up to a dollar amount, right? Typically like $5,000. We have a give or get policy. All of our board members have to contribute $5,000 every year to the nonprofit organization. That's good practice because that means your board members are bought into the concept and they're committing to supporting the organization either from their own funding or from their circle of influence to help with that. And that's really what you want in a board. Boards should be probably 7 to 13 board members, ideally. You always want an odd number in case you have a voting conflict somewhere. You want somebody to be the tiebreaker. Have the give or get policy and make sure that your board members are well-rounded from their background and their experience, right? So get an attorney, get an accountant, get a marketing person, get somebody who's an equine specialist, right? In your case, Marie, so that you have some outside knowledge and some input there. Get people that are therapists, right? But don't get a whole room of all your friends who are all therapists on your board. That's not helping you as the organization, because the board's job is to govern the operations of your business, right? So when you create a board for your nonprofit entity, keep in mind that board can vote to say that you're no longer the executive director of that nonprofit. And in some cases, that's a good thing, because you don't want to be the executive director anymore, and they'll appoint somebody new, but the nonprofit lives on. Or some cases, it doesn't go down very well. I've been board members on lots of nonprofits, and I unfortunately have had to fire 2 executive directors in my time in nonprofits. And but you want them there to govern you and to guide you and to help you from a strategic standpoint of moving the organization forward in that way. So cool. I'll hang out for a couple more minutes if there's any other questions.